We read very closely the Secretary-General's report on the threat posed by ISIL. The information about the ongoing high level of a threat and the evolution of the challenges is alarming. It reminds us that fighting terrorism is only possible together. However, unfortunately, against this backdrop, some states politicize the counter-terrorism agenda. Double standards in the fight against terrorism, interference on the pretext of counterterrorism in the internal affairs of sovereign states, is now the calling card of Western countries who don't balk at using even international terrorist organizations for their own geopolitical purposes. Tame terrorists, destabilize developing countries. After that, the West, allegedly in order to fight them, shifts to the tried and tested tactic of destroying the state to plunder the natural and human resources of it. We will illustrate this argument with some specific examples, all substantiated by information contained in the Secretary-General's report. Let's start with the situation in Syria. ISIL is increasing its terrorist activity in this country. At the same time, terrorists are prospering in those regions which were illegally seized and are occupied by the US military. US military bases built in Syria as a result of the West's aggression against this country are used, inter alia, to pump out and smuggle Syrian oil, essentially to steal it. Around these bases, there is a real terrorist ghetto has formed. In the area where there are camps, where there are also people linked with ISIL and members of their families. The situation in these places is nothing but a humanitarian and food crisis. The declarative statements of Western colleagues who love to hold forth on the respect for human rights when carrying out counterterrorism measures, as always, are at odds with their real actions. Thus, the majority of Western states, despite many calls in the Secretary-General's reports, still refuse to return their citizens who are in these camps. EU countries have openly failed at this work and are not fulfilling their obligations on repatriation, accountability, rehabilitation and reintegration of foreign terrorist fighters and members of their families. President, particular attention should be paid to the activities of the terrorist group ISIL Khorasan, whose growing capabilities is something that we warned about long ago, at a time when NATO and US forces were still in Afghanistan. However, this information was deliberately ignored, and the growth and influence of this group was played down. And in the reports, there were reduced numbers on the number of fighters of this Afghan branch of ISIL. The scale of their spread is downplayed, and their ties in the region were underestimated. As a result, the international community did not pay due attention to fighting this structure, and then the group continued to develop untamed. Now, ISIL Khorasan is a threat not only to Afghanistan and the neighbouring region, but also to Europe. Indeed, we would caution those who try, before the end of the official investigation, to ascribe the terrorist attack in the Moscow region, the Crocus City Hall, on the 22nd of March, ascribe it exclusively to ISIL and ISIL Khorasan. If colleagues have proof of this, then I would invite them to share it with the specialized Russian bodies in charge of this. Sometimes we get the impression that some people know more about this act of terrorism than those who are investigating it. President, no less concerning is the situation linked with the activity of terrorists in the African continent. In the Secretary-General's report, it is highlighted that terrorist groups continue to focus their activities in Africa. In the sanctions monitoring group on ISIL and their affiliated individuals and entities in that report, which is now annexed to the Secretary-General's report, there is detail given to the merging of activities of terrorists in the region. It's stated that the permanent takeover of this territory by groups linked to ISIL and by the listed group JNIM in the Sahel still brings with it many victims and has an impact on regional security and stability. End of quote. It also contains information about these groups' intentions to sign non-aggression agreements with PPSD in order to focus their efforts exclusively on Mali and on those who support the forces in the fight against terrorism in the north of the country. There is no longer any doubt that there is now cooperation between these groups. They share a territory where they carry out their activity. And amongst the other proof of the fact that they coordinate between themselves, the transfer of one of the members of the Arab movement, Azawad, to the CSP-PSD alongside tens of fighters to Janim. This fact is also reflected in the most recent report of the monitoring group. The situation is being compounded and the threat is evolving, not least because the interested countries don't deem it necessary even to try to camouflage their support for international terrorist organizations. States in the region on many occasions have brought forward information about systemic financing and training of fighters of these groups by France. Intelligence is gathered for members of Janim and they're provided with weapons and ammunition. This goes as far as brazen cases when some states openly flaunt their support for international terrorist organizations in Africa. Special mention here goes to a direct statement of the official spokesperson of the head of the intelligence division of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, Yusov, and the ambassador of Ukraine to Senegal, Pirovarov, saying that their country provided support to those who attacked Malian armed forces in Mali on the border with Algeria in the region of Tin Zawatin on the 25th and 27th of July. We underscore that this attack was carried out inter alia by a group affiliated to Al-Qaeda. The reaction from Sahel states was swift. The statement of the Malian government on this was disseminated as an official Security Council document from the 5th of August. And this was followed by official statements of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Burkina Faso and the representative of Niger. African states firmly condemned Ukraine's support for international terrorism on their continent and the open interference in their internal affairs and the destabilization of their circumstances. Mali and Niger, as we know, broke diplomatic relations with Ukraine. Even in the Western press, there is material published that the terrorist groups operating in Mali are being trained to use drones and explosives overseen by Ukrainian special services both on the territory of Ukraine and also on the territory of Mali in terrorist-controlled regions. We know firsthand about the terrorist essence of the Kiev regime. The Russian delegation on many occasions has brought specific factual information about the real face of the West's cherished Kiev regime, who, with a nod or with a supervision of or with close cooperation with their backers from NATO countries, have long been not shied away from using openly terrorist methods. Now we can see for ourselves with the terrorist attack by Ukrainian fighters on the Kursk region, carried out using Western-supplied weapons. Sufficient testimony has been posted online of how nationalists deliberately are shooting unarmed civilians, destroying civilian objects. In a word, they're acting just how 80 years ago their German fascist predecessors did, who they now idolize. And they will see the same end. And Western backers of Zelensky's junta and their terrorist activities are not only not criticized, but they're essentially justified. Being justified. This is a real merge of terrorists. The information that we had, and information confirmed by representatives of African states and European law enforcement agencies, for example, Europol, about Western-supplied weapons to Ukraine falling into the hands of terrorist groups and criminal groups in various regions of the world has been confirmed. We call on specialized experts for UN bodies to at least now not just shrug off this data, but carefully study it and assess on the basis of this, the role of Western special services and their Ukrainian disciples in the organization and abetting of this type of terrorist attacks. Colleagues, moreover, I'd like to recall that the existing sanctions regime 1267 provides for the imposition of sanctions against any individuals, groups or organizations affiliated to ISIL and Al-Qaeda. In order to fight terrorism, we think it's important to use this tried and tested mechanism to hold accountable those who actively assist terrorists, and also those who themselves don't hide these links and actively advertise them. Otherwise, all these grand statements and bombastic rhetoric on the need to fight international terrorism will ring hollow. Thank you very much.